Once upon a time, before Socrates, before Plato, before all those kids, there was this kid named Archimedes. And Archimedes, he was a big fan of, you guessed it, circles. So he had this question. He had this question that he wanted to know. He was like, we got to set up the problem, right? Let's get to the problem first. So he said, first imagine a square, kind of square. All right, now let that square, let's call it, I don't know, S1. Not very imaginative name. Then let's imagine a circle. Let's imagine that that square is inscribed inside of a circle. So it's inside of a circle. Then, and let's circle be circle C, because circle begins with a C, even though it sounds like it begins with an S. Then imagine another square, a square that's bigger than that circle. Let's call this, I don't know, square 2. Now the perimeter of square 1 is smaller than the circumference of circle C, and this perimeter of square 2 is larger than the circumference of circle C, right? Now, obviously. Now, Archimedes had this postulate. He said, given that there can be a square, the perimeter of which is smaller than a given circle C, and a square, the perimeter of which is larger than that given square, that given circle C, then there must be a square, the perimeter of which is equal to the circumference of circle C, right? So let's see. Let's make the perimeter of square 1 is P1. So perimeter of square 1 is less than the circumference of circle C, which is less than the perimeter of square 2, right? So P1 is less than C, which is less than P2, fine. But then Archimedes said, given that, I postulate that it is possible for there to be a square that is the same size as the circle. So he said, if there can be a square smaller than the circle, and there can be a square larger than the circle, then why can't there be a square equal to the circle? Now, this was a really, really long time ago, right? And he was like, he couldn't prove it. He couldn't figure out a way to prove it, but he just felt it was right. He just felt it, right? He just believed it. Even though there was no proof for it, he just felt like it must be the case. And so he just postulated. Postulate is like, I think this is just like, I don't have any proof, but I just think that this is the case. And then lots of mathematicians came after him and they were like, it seems like the case. It seems pretty logical. So let's prove it. Let's give some evidence for it. And then they couldn't. And then some other philosophers, and they were like, they couldn't. And some other mathematicians, and they couldn't. And it just went on like this for like 1,000, 1,600 years, right? They couldn't prove this. Why couldn't they prove it? Well, because it's not provable. It's not true. You can't have a perimeter equal to the circumference of a circle. Why? Because a square is a finite figure, right? It has lengths with finite sides, and those lengths are all equal, right? Every side is equal. What's the perimeter of a square? What's the formula for a perimeter of a square? Let's just say 4 times s, right? S equals the length of a side, so 4s. So couldn't you have a square whose perimeter is 4s? Why couldn't you have one equal to a circle, the circumference? What's the formula for a circumference of a circle? Isn't it something like 2 pi r? 2 pi r. So let's just solve this, right? So we want to simplify this. How long would the side have to be, right? If we wanted to make a square that was equal to the perimeter of a circle, then let's start with a circle, 2 pi r. Let's let r be, let's let r be 2, right? So Let's just go ahead and define this circle and say the radius equals 2. 2 what? I don't care. 2 freshmen. 2 whatever, right? 2. So 4s equals 2 pi 2. So 4 pi, right? Divide both sides by 4 and you get s equals pi. So yeah, sure, you could have a square with the perimeter equal to the circumference of a circle. It just has to have sides that are equal to pi. What's the problem with that? Well, pi is an irrational number, right? It's an irrational transcendental number that doesn't have any ending, right? It's 3.14159365378. I forget. I'm not good with that. It's some numbers. But 3.14 stuff. It keeps going. It keeps going and it keeps going. It keeps going way longer than Energizer, right? It can't. There's no ending to pi. It keeps going. So if you were to draw a square, then when would you know that you reached the end of that square? You never would reach the end of that square, right? You would never be able to finish the calculation of where to stop that square. Now you could say, well, practically this doesn't matter. That's fine, sure. Practically, maybe... Does it not matter practically? Feels like it would matter practically. But, so practically you couldn't make a square with the side equal to pi, because pi is an irrational number, right? So you can't, it is irrational. That's what the word irrational, meaning it can't be rationed. It's not logical. Can't be, it's irrational. Right? And a square is a finite rational figure, so you can't have a finite side of an irrational length unless you're talking about an imaginary square, a transcendental square, a hypothetical square, which only exists in one's mind, right? Now that I can get along with, right? So then we could say a circle only exists as an abstract ideological entity, and likewise a square only exists as an abstract ideological entity. Fine, because both of them are made, by the way, by dimensionless points, right? Neither of them have any width. It only has length, width, but no depth, right? So technically this can't be a square because the atoms that make up the chalk drawn on the board have a particular depth, and a square has no depth. It's dimensionless with respect to depth. So if it had depth, then it wouldn't be a square. What's the point? Well, the point is that a circle only exists as an idea, right? A circle qua circle, a circle as a circle, not as an image of a circle or as a representation of a circle or a signification of a circle or a symbol of a circle, but a circle as a circle only exists as an idea, cannot exist in any other way, because it is dimensionless, right? So in my mind's eye, I can imagine a circle that, for all intents and purposes, has no dimension. It exists in the fourth dimension, but not in the other three. If I were to draw it down, then it would exist in all four dimensions, but it would no longer be dimensionless, right? Now, I just want to say, as I'm erasing this, that I've been teaching this stuff for a long time, and I teach the same things in lots of different ways, in part because there are a lot of different kind of learners. There are a lot of different kind of students, and students learn in different kinds of ways. And some people, mathematics and this Archimedes stuff and this postulation, it just clicks and it makes perfect sense, and the whole lesson comes into focus because of this. And other ones are like, yeah, it didn't help at all. Or I understood what you're talking about 5 minutes ago, but you lost me at pi. that's cool, right? I mean, that's part of the point, is that we understand these things from varying perspectives, and some people will understand the JPEG reference really well, and other people will be like, I don't know what a JPEG is, or what are you talking about binary representation of, colored pixels? It's just people learn in different ways. This is one way, and it clicks with a lot of students, but it doesn't click with everybody, and some it may just seem mystifying and confusing, and that I'm also okay with. Why am I okay with that? I'm okay with that because there's a certain epistemic humility which comes with recognizing the limitations of our understanding. So if we reach a point of confusion, or what one philosopher that I don't like to say his name, but one philosopher calls startled dismay, this Befindlichkeit, this finding oneself in a state of confusion, right? Or recognizing that I don't understand everything, or as Socrates said in the Theaetetus dialogue, I don't know any of the things that other people know. How can these other people know these things that they know? I understand that I can't know them. Anyway, confusion is okay. All right, so a quick recap of a couple of key points in order to begin tying things together. Let's go back again to the definition of a circle that I've given you more times than I can remember or count. What is the definition of a circle? A circle is an infinite series of dimensionless points equidistant from a single dimensionless point. Right? Now, when we were talking about Brahmagupta, we said that Brahmagupta pointed out that 0 minus 0, shunyata, shunyam, shunyat, rina akasha, 0 taken away from 0 leaves us only with the empty space, right? We're erasing the signifier, because the signifier 0 as signifier brings nothingness into being. It lets nothing be. It gives nothing a place to be. We also gave a definition of 0 as a circle. Well, 0 is a signifier which signifies nothing by drawing a circle around nothing, right? But its intent is to signify the nothing by drawing a circle around it. And if we want to, but in doing so, it causes that nothing to come into being over and against all these other nothings, thereby turning nothing into a something. So Brahmagupta again is saying that if we want to truly signify the nothing, then we need to subtract the signifier, or the null set in mathematical terms. We can't get rid of the null, but we have to get rid of the set, right? A null set is still a set. So to subtract a null set from a null set is to leave us just with the null, right? But without any set, right? To erase the set from the null set. All of this is to say that signifiers, like 0 is a signifier, but any other signifier also creates an intellectual division, right? So I'm going to write that down. So what is the point I want you to take from all of this? Well, there are a lot of them. But one of the main points that I want you to take away from this is that signifiers, any signifier, 0 is a signifier, words, all the words that we were using are signifiers, right? Red, not red, all of these words that we've been using are signifiers. Words are signifiers. Signifiers are intellectual divisions created by the mind, right? Intellectual divisions brought into being by the mind. At the beginning, we saw this little clip from the Zen Buddhist master who was saying, through this Enso meditation, we're reminded of this is an act of creativity without creativity in order to draw our attention to the emptiness of the form that we are creating, the form, the zero that is being created by the artist or by the mind, that is drawing intellectual divisions of here and there, inside and outside, the A and not A, right? But these intellectual divisions are simply created by the mind, and both the inside and the outside come into being or arise mutually. In Sanskrit, pratitya samutpada, they're brought into being at the same time, right? So signifiers are intellectual divisions created by the mind or brought into being by the mind. In the same way that zero signifies a nothing by turning nothing into something, all signifiers do likewise, right? Any signifier that we're using, whether we're calling something God, or we say soul, or we call whatever words that we use to describe things, those words bring those things into being by drawing intellectual divisions that are created by the mind. And we might draw those intellectual distinctions otherwise, but if we're being logical, then those intellectual distinctions have an excluded. Well, there's no overlap between A and not A. Now, in reality, things may not be so simple and so cut and dry, right? But we're not in reality right now. We're in the intellectual divisions that are created by our mind. And what we're trying to do right now is to get out of that space, right? How do we do that? By understanding the logic that governs it. And by understanding how language works and how the intellect divides reality into particular, segmentations or conceptual categories. Once we do that, then we can begin, as Brahmagupta was saying, by first understanding that which is signified by the signifier and then erasing that signification. Or, to link this back to the previous lesson, Edmund Husserl said that the phenomenological method entails what he called epoche, or bracketing out, right? Taking things and saying, all right, let me control for this, let me control for that. Just as one would do a scientific experience and say, all right, well, let me control for heat, let me control for external factors such as humidity, right? So when you're doing a scientific experience, you have to control for all these various factors. Likewise, when you're doing logic and philosophy, you have to control for this. Well, what about this word? Is this word going to be a problem? Don't people use the word soul in various ways? Do people use the word soul and mind synonymously or not? What about soul and spirit? Obviously, these are not synonymous words. So what distinctions are we going to make between soul, spirit, and mind, such that when we use those words, we are being clear and articulate, such that we are adhering to the law of identity and being careful about how we define words and preventing there from being any overlap or distinction between those. But nevertheless, even as we do those, as we create those intellectual divisions by our mind, let us not forget the fact that these are intellectual divisions created by the mind, which might just as well be created otherwise, right? These are just fabrications, they're creations of our mind that we might have created otherwise, and we can create otherwise, right? We don't have to think about race in the same way that it has been thought about. We don't have to think about gender in the same way that has been thought about. We don't have to think about sexuality in the same binaries that have been thought about before. But instead, we can first recognize those historical intellectual divisions as they've been made, recognize the utility of those significations, but then begin to erase those significations, just as the Buddhist monk does, right? Recognizing the temporality of the present moment. And this act of mindfulness is one breathes in and one breathes out. We recognize the temporality of the present moment. It's passing and it's coming and it's passing as future actualizes its potentiality to be the present, and then extinguishes that potentiality to become the past, right? In the same way that the circle indicates that ontological temporality of the now, the here and now, and our minds create those intellectual divisions in the here and now. In the same way that those significations offer us a way to understand or comprehend the reality in which we find ourselves. In the same way, those could also be divided otherwise, right? They are nevertheless created by our minds and could be created otherwise. In the same way that the circle fades at every moment unless we continue to redraw it over and over, like here is racism, this is what racism is, let's not forget what racism and white supremacy are, right? Or we could stop and begin again. Let's start over.